kept on walking forward. She's like, why is he sitting so far forward? So, we're about ready to get started, but did everybody grab no boxes for you today? So no boxes, but everybody has a sheet. You will need that as we make our way through our time together. If you would, let's start our time together in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we bow our hearts before you this evening, and Lord, we are grateful. Grateful that for each of us gathered here or on the live stream, Lord, you have given us a testimony. You've given to each of us a story of the ways in which you have been at work in our hearts and in our lives so that we can share the love of Christ from a particular place, with particular experiences of your redeeming work, of your restoration in our lives. And we pray that as we lean into that a little bit tonight, you would help us just explore maybe a new depth of that testimony and that story that you've written into our lives, that you ask us now to share with the world. Lord, would you meet our story with the good news of Jesus so that we proclaim the gospel through our lives and through our words. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I have a question that I want to start with tonight. We're talking about developing your personal testimony, but just out of curiosity, does anybody know anybody who is over-saved? Anybody? I want to start answering that question. Maybe some of you have seen this person before, this man. His name is Michael Jr. Michael Jr. is one of my favorite Christian comedians, but he answers the question, how to know if you're over-saved. And I'm going to play a short video for you, and as we listen to it, I hope that you will come to discover what not to do when it comes to your personal testimony. So this is Michael Jr. Are you over-saved? Uh-oh. Hold on. Oh, hold on. Oh. Well, you'll get the point. for indulging me on that. Oversaved, right? I think he gives us a pretty fun way to kind of get at that just a little bit. There's some good ways to share the gospel. There's some good ways to share your faith, and then there's things that are just maybe a little bit of overkill. And so hopefully we can laugh at ourselves a little bit. We can get just a decent sense there that maybe those aren't the best ways to go about sharing our faith and developing our testimony. But I want to dig in with you for a little bit tonight, and I hope that by the end of our time together, there's going to be a fair bit of not only information presented to you, but an invitation for you to do more reflection when you go home. Because I can't tell you how to develop your own testimony just in an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour this evening. But I want to give you maybe some frameworks that can propel you as you leave this place, and you got to do maybe a little bit of homework. I'm going to give you some time while we sit here together, but to really capture the pulse and the heartbeat of what we're going to do tonight, it does require you to go home and do some homework as well. I want to tell you the story of two trains. And if you have your sheet, you'll notice that on the front and the back of that, there is two little trains on the bottom. I'll get to there in just a moment about where they are. They fit into these two categories. One is what I'm going to call the night train, and the other is what I'm going to call the day train. And this came several years ago. Somebody told me this story, this illustration, and it's about those of us who have grown up in the church. Really sometimes struggle to have what we consider to be a really good testimony. We don't have that moment in life that we can look at and we can say, well, that was the exact moment at the exact time with the exact experience where I knew that I'd given my life over to the Lord, or the Lord had saved me at that moment. In some regards, many of us, if we've grown up in the church, have taken the night train into a relationship with Jesus. And the night train is what I mean by this. If you look over here on the map, you'll see that there's two things. There's a town called Budapest, and there's another town called Cluj-Napoca. If you remember, I talked about these two towns. I've actually taken a train ride from between these two cities when I spent some time over in Romania, and we actually took a night train. And so there was a moment where in the middle of the night, we crossed over from Budapest, which is in Hungary, to Cluj, which is in Romania. And if you see this little gray line right here, that's the border between those two countries. I don't remember when we crossed that line. I don't remember when we crossed that border, but at some point while I was asleep in that train car, we crossed over from Hungary into Romania. If you take that kind of image, that is maybe an image that helps us understand those of us who have grown up in the church. It's grown up in Christian homes where we've been told the story of Jesus for our whole life, where we've been through Sunday school and youth group, and we've taken catechism, and we've had all sorts of Christian family and friends that have surrounded us. And it's as if we've just started along the journey, and then one day we woke up and we just realized that this story was our own. Nothing seemingly dramatic happened. Nothing wrestled our attention away from us. It just happened gradually over time. And we woke up one day and we knew that we were in a different place. We knew that we were in a different country. We knew that this relationship with Jesus that had always been talked about all around us had now become personal, and it had become our own. That in some regards is like taking the train in the night. You knew where you left, and you knew where you ended up, but somewhere in the middle, you crossed over that border between those two countries. It's similar to those of us who have grown up in the church and in the Christian faith. I'm going to make a case that is still a wonderful and beautiful place to be. And we can still develop really powerful testimonies even in the midst of that. Now, the other one is the day train. And the day train, you know exactly when you have crossed the border between Hungary and Romania. You know exactly that moment. There's probably an exact time. You can name even a date or a location, a specific place where the Lord got a hold of your heart and you gave your life over to Jesus Christ. And it has much more specificity to it. Think of it maybe this way: Saul on the Damascus Road. That sort of event or experience. That's probably more what comes to mind when we think of developing our personal testimony. And why maybe some of us who have grown up in the church struggle to write that testimony well. I want to take a look with you at writing and developing our testimonies on both of these trains. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. Even for us, it's important to know, even if we've grown up in the church, why it's important to know what it looks like to write a testimony developing it on the day train. So, again, your sheet should be in front of you. We're going to look first at the night train. It's the side that starts with that little image in the top left-hand corner. And again, this is the night train, right? This is where we, from the time that we were a child, have been brought up in the church. It's the time since we were a child where the people around us have kept telling us the story of Jesus until we one day make it our own. I just want to invite you, that is an absolutely beautiful place to be. And it can be an absolutely profound testimony to someone who doesn't have that experience, to know that there are places in this world yet where there is Christian community that surrounds children. That in and of itself can be a gospel witness and presentation. It is beautiful in our world and in our culture today to be able to trace out generational faithfulness. Now, granted, it comes with some sensitivity. Not everybody, and even in decline, that generational faithfulness is declining in our culture and in our world today. But it can be an absolutely beautiful place to start, telling your testimony that I started inside of a Christian home. I started inside of a church where they told me the stories of Jesus. Now, here, it does require a personal acceptance or response to it. It's not like you can just bank on your parents' faith and you just somehow live on that. It does require that profession of faith, that personal response. And there's a marking point in that journey for many of us. But it's just simply a long story in which we respond to the faithfulness of God and his people. So don't overestimate that, or underestimate that, I should say. That if we're developing our testimonies, it has to include the covenant community, the faithfulness of God, and this long practice of rehearsing the story of salvation until we make it our own. The second slide is probably where we're going to dig in just a little bit more. I have a book here because there's a book on my shelf in my office. It's called Writing Your Own Spiritual Autobiography. And it is primarily for those who have grown up in the faith. They've grown up in the church. They've grown up in Christian homes. And it's an effort to get on paper the story of God's work in our life. And so I want to offer you 4 different categories of things that you could begin to write out your own spiritual autobiography. The first one would be significant moments. Significant moments or dates or events in your life. If some of your kids or you yourself have ever gone on like a summer workshop in ministry, a swim program, or a convention program, it'd be things like that. Special events or circumstances or moments in life that were really tied you into the work of Jesus in your life. Another one would be significant people. Can you go through your story from the time you were really little and think about who were the significant or impactful people in your life? And what did they teach you? Or what impact did they have on your life? I've shared several of them from the pulpit along the way. Women like Irma Vanderay. I've told the story of Irma. Irma had a huge impact in my life, on my faith, and on my journey towards following Jesus. Jeff Caswell was another one. I've mentioned to him a couple different times. So go back if you're going to write that autobiography. Significant people, and then the impact that they made on your life. The next one, significant struggles. And then how did those struggles change you, challenge you, or grow you? How did, in the midst of that struggle, did you learn something new about Christ? And then the final one is significant celebrations. Can you capture in your story moments where you have seen the gospel work, if you will, in other people's lives? Was there a marriage of an aunt and uncle that was saved by forgiveness? Was there a special season of baptism in your family, where maybe an adult child or a cousin or someone in their later years came to know Jesus, and you celebrated that baptism and that profession of faith? Significant celebrations, where you witnessed and you saw the gospel at work in somebody else's life. Another way that maybe you could think about this is writing your spiritual autobiography is really tracing out the hand of God's faithfulness in your story. Where you have these moments, these events, these people, these struggles, these celebrations, and you then tie that into how has God used those to change you and grow you and strengthen your faith. That's at the heart of that. And I think, given a fair bit of time, most of us sitting in the room could do that well. Again, I told you this is the Cliff Notes version. You're going to have to take this home, and if you really want to develop your testimony in this regard, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some doing some homework, or in your devotion, sitting around the kitchen table, and really putting some thought and prayer into the events, the people, the struggles, and the celebrations that God has used to bring you closer to Him. Does that make sense? Okay, remember, we're on the night train here. This is, I would imagine, for most of us in the room. We started in the church, we've had this journey with Him, and all of a sudden someday we woke up and there we were. We were in this relationship with Jesus, and it was an amazing thing. I want to add to you one more on the night train. And that's this little icon here. And this one's pretty simple. This is maybe more homework than it is what I want to talk about with you tonight. But this is your favorite verse and why. Your favorite verse and why. For those of us who have grown up in the church, for those of us who have been on the night train, and we woke up one morning and there we were in relationship with Jesus. Oftentimes in our lives, there was a verse that met us in a particularly tough moment or season in life. And that verse shaped the way we saw that experience. Maybe it was in a really meaningful moment. Maybe it was a verse that was shared with you by your pastor at your profession of faith. And that verse has just maybe stuck with you throughout your journey and your story. So this one is your favorite verse. And why? Why is it your favorite verse? That gives you the opportunity to share how that verse has impacted you and challenged and encouraged your relationship with Jesus when given the opportunity to share. Any questions on that? Again, in order to put this into practice, you're going to have to take this home and you're going to have to do the hard work, right? I'm trying to give you the framework by which you can run with this and you can see once where the Lord leads. But again, all of these are ways in which we can begin to develop a personal testimony where our story expresses the good news of Jesus Christ into the world. I'm going to jump with you then, and we're going to head to the day train. It's the other side of the page, and this one is going to be maybe a little bit more nebulous, if I could, at least in part. The first one maybe not here, but the next one maybe. There's a man by the name of Randy Newman, and Randy Newman has worked and is working with Campus Crusade for Christ. He's been with that organization, that ministry, for over 30 years, and he wrote a book called Questioning Christianity. And the title throws you off for a little bit, but basically what he talks about is the way in which effective evangelism in our world today happens through the practicing of questions. Now we're going to get to that in just a moment, but he sets the stage for that by saying every Christian needs to start by having a presentation or a testimony prepared in advance before they go in, so that if the question does come of an invitation to share your faith, you have that already prepared. And he says there's two testimonies that every Christian needs to have prepared. And so there's two puzzle pieces, and I want to give you those two kind of testimonies to have ready. The first is, how does the gospel change me? How has the gospel changed me? And this is, again, probably in its shortest form, the Amazing Grace formula. I once was this, but now I'm this. The Navigators also have a tool out there. They use it kind of in this manner. They talk about describe life before Jesus, and then describe what changed happened because of Jesus, and then describe how life was different after that change happened. Okay, so life before, what was happening in life before Jesus? How did Jesus himself address that? And then what is life different? How is life different now after that experience with Jesus? That's a Navigator's tool. It's right on their website if you wanted to go and look a little bit more fully at that. But again, Randy Newman talks about this is a critical way that every Christian needs to have their testimony ready. Now, I want to just offer you a pondering that I have in light of this. And I know that in the Christian Reformed Church in particular, we're really good at saying that we're sinners. And we're really good at saying that we're saved by grace and that we're living for Jesus. I think everything that I've read pushes on this idea of we can't remain generic in this. It pushes on the idea of specificity, of being clear in experiences of the gospel that we have had in our own life. The one that I shared, it comes to mind. I shared it with you in church the other week. I once was angry, but now I'm much more at peace. Right? If you remember that we have to push towards being specific about the changes that have happened in our life because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the more that I read on this topic, the more it seems to be that anytime we stay generic, it can be kind of lost in the wind, if you will. But the more specific we can be about telling the story of what transformation or what change has happened, becomes that invitation for someone else to know and experience what Jesus can do. So just maybe a side comment on that, or an augmentation of that same theme or that same idea. that same testimony that Randy Newman suggests. The second puzzle piece is tied to that, but it's a little different. And the second puzzle piece is, what difference does the gospel make in my life? And so maybe if you're writing a note, just write difference. And so here's maybe the picture that Randy Newman gives, and I think it's really, really helpful to kind of rustle out the difference. Randy Newman tells a story in a lecture that I listened to. He tells a story about riding along in the car with his brother, who's an atheist, a stark atheist, like wants nothing to do with the Jewish faith in which they were raised or the Christian faith in which Randy is now part of. He wants nothing to do with religion. He wants nothing to do with God. But him and his brother were on a car ride together, and his brother was asking the question. They were talking about marriage. Both of them are married, and he says, "How do you and your wife make it work?" And Randy Newman's response was a version of a testimony. He talked about, in that moment, he had the opportunity to share with his brother that the only way that him and his wife, Randy and his wife, have navigated married life together is through forgiveness. Forgiveness is at the heart of a healthy marriage. And he was able to then say that Jesus and his faith has shown him and taught him what true forgiveness is. That's a sort of other sort of testimony that we as Christians need to have. And this is the day train, right? This isn't some morning I woke up and all of a sudden I just understood what forgiveness was, or I woke up and I had been all of a sudden really good at forgiving my wife. This is where we have very clear expressions or examples of how this has changed us along the way. So again, those two kind of different pieces, but two testimonies that every Christian needs to have in place. I once was this, but now I'm this. How has the gospel actually transformed my life? And what difference does the gospel make in the here and now? What difference does the gospel have in our day-to-day experiences and expressions of life along the way? So I want to pause there for a moment, because the next section of this gets a little deeper. So I just want to make sure we're all kind of together in some of these models and these ways that we are being invited to express our testimony. Any questions, first of all, that you have? And if you came here tonight saying you were going to speak when you were called upon, this would be the easier side of it, because my next question is a little harder. Any questions that you have about where we've been? Again, you have to take the framework, you have to bring it home, you have to do the homework, you have to put your own language, your own vocabulary, your own experience on some of those frameworks. But any questions about that so far? All right, now the harder question. So if you committed to the Lord that you were going to share today, here's your opportunity. Is anybody willing to put into practice either of those two testimonies? I once was this, but now I'm this. Or this is how the gospel and the life of Jesus has made a difference in my life. Because I'm going to encourage you, if you won't do it here, it's going to be harder to do it out there. Does anybody have one that comes to mind that you'd be willing to share? She's going to go for it.
I guess one thing about me, and my favorite Bible verse is 1 Corinthians 13, with love. And for me, I really try hard to be open to anybody. And so whether they're different than me. I like to go and talk to them. You know, all of a sudden somebody will talk to, well, like yesterday I talked to a man who said that he was a farmer, and him and his husband farmed 100 acres. And you know, we had a nice conversation about what all that was. Maybe it's going down to the end of the road, and a neighbor guy has a bunch of political signs in his yard, and he's sitting out there. So I pull up, and I walk with my chair down there, and we just sit and we have a conversation. Just see who he is.
Sure. Thank you. First Corinthians 13 shapes a lot. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. I recognize that you maybe have to take that home a little bit. You got to put some thought behind it. You got to put some words down on paper. But I want to encourage you. A pastor by the name of Richard Leisher, in his book called Open Secrets, he talks about gossiping the gospel. It's a phrase that he spins. And he says that's the way when he served a small Lutheran church in the heartland in Illinois. He would just tell one lady in the ladies' aid circle what needed to be circulated in the church. And as soon as he told that one lady, the whole church would know within a matter of about 3 hours. That's gossiping the gospel. And I want to encourage you to do that as you begin to develop your testimonies. Share that with each other, so that you're encouraging each other by the stories and the testimonies that you have. And it makes it a whole lot easier if we know that other people are practicing the same thing. So gossip the gospel with each other. Just take a look around you, see who's here. You're the lucky few that get the blessing of that story along the way. So I'm going to jump ahead, and we're gonna look to the next picture. Does anybody know what type of tree this is? It is a bonsai tree. Who said that? Oh, top notch. The image connected. If you're not familiar with a bonsai tree is an ancient Japanese practice that over years, decades, the one who is forming the bonsai tree carefully goes through the practice of cultivating the tree so that it looks exactly the way they want it. They'll use string to tie branches down. They'll use a tiny little clippers to prune off the branches that they don't want. It is a meticulous process of care, of a long commitment, and it's careful attention to what they are trying to cultivate into this particular tree. I chose this image of a bonsai tree because of where Randy Newman goes next. He talks about the way in which Christians need to carefully cultivate long-term relationships, but he does it through the process of questions. And I know we're here talking about developing your personal testimony, but I would submit to you that if we learn how to ask really good questions, over the long haul, that becomes much more influential and experiential for those who we are witnessing to. Randy Newman goes on for a long time in the lecture that I listened to about the way Jesus himself always asked questions. And it was in the questions that the people themselves discovered the answer, and it made it much more profound and powerful as they experienced it. And so I want to have you try to fill in with me these four kind of branches on the bonsai tree with themes or threads, if you will, of what Randy Newman talks about when it comes to developing good questions or cultivating better questions for witnessing to people. He talks about how, if you just right up here, and you can probably fit it in there better than I can, he talks about how some people are not even awake. So we have to ask questions that wake people up. Ask questions that wake people up. He describes this in this way. He says he has people regularly approach him, and they will ask this sort of question. It doesn't, or they'll make this statement. It says, "It doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you." Now, how many of you have ever heard something similar to that? Right? Like that's a pretty standard phrase of kind of this whatever feels good works, right? In his lecture, he says, "I've worked really hard on developing good questions, but the question that I always keep coming back to, it's a pretty good question." And he says, "Really?" That was his question. He says, some people, they spout jargon, or they say a phrase, and they're not even thinking about what they're saying. And he says, sometimes you just need to ask a question that wake people up. Particularly, I love where he went with that. He quoted the Screw Tape Letters. Is anybody familiar with the Screw Tape Letters? Some. The Screw Tape Letters is a wonderful book written by C.S. Lewis. It's a book where two demons are having a conversation about how to keep their person from becoming a believer. So it's a little hard to understand what's all going on, but it's two demons trying to figure out how to tempt and keep this person from believing in Jesus. It's probably the best way to say it. And there's a line that he quotes. He says, "Jargon, not argument, is your best bet to keep people distracted." Jargon, not argument, is your best bet to keep people distracted. And there's so many ways in which we experience jargon, soundbite culture. People just saying things because that's what they heard on the news, or that's what they heard in the most recent tweet or Facebook post or Instagram post, and it just becomes jargon. It becomes just something that you just say. And yet we have to begin to learn how to ask questions that wake people up. His question is, really? Another way that you might begin to ask a question like, well, help me understand what you mean by that, right? There's different ways in which we can begin to ask a question back that wakes people up to what they're actually saying in their words. So that's number one, ask questions to wake people up. The second is there are certain things out there that people say that just simply are not true. And so part of what we have to learn is we have to learn how to ask questions that invite people to explain. He uses the illustration. He says the statement that is, "I think that all religions are true." Now, if you're awake and you're thinking about that statement, is it actually true? Is it actually possible that every religion is true? No. Because most religions in the world, at least major religions, make an exclusive claim about how to be saved at the expense of other religions. So they can't all possibly be true at the same time. And out of curiosity, out of respect, Randy Newman says that part of what it means to begin to witness is to ask the questions that invite people to explain. And explore alongside of them, is that actually a true statement? Can that actually be true? And it leads us down this kind of conversation of questions and curiosity that begin to kind of pull back the curtain on truth. So ask people to explain. The next one is we have to learn how to ask questions that either discern someone's intent or diffuse sarcasm. Ask questions that help discern intent or diffuse sarcasm. You could call it anger. Those are the two that he uses primarily. He talks about this reality that often inside of, religious conversations, the questions that people ask are not even sincere. And so as believers, we need to be able to start asking questions and prepare questions in advance for helping us wrestle with this idea. How do we discern what's truly at the heart? Are they just being sarcastic? Are they just being angry? Is it a true searching? Or is it just a question that's supposed to just shut the whole conversation down? He talked about this, the question that he posed, that has been posed to him. He says, so are you telling me that just because they're an alcoholic, they're going to hell? And he's talked about the way in which people pick on these particular sins that Christians have, and then they kind of phrase their question in such a way that they don't really want the answer. They're just trying to live in their little microscope of a thought and stick it to the Christian along the way. And so Randy Newman talks about the way in which we have to develop better questions to diffuse the anger or to discern the intent. He didn't really give any great examples of that in the lecture that I listened to. What he did go on to talk about was the Proverbs, where he talks about answering a fool in his folly, and you'll become a fool. In that moment, he says, just simply giving them an answer and throwing a bunch of theology at them isn't going to do any good. It's just going to prove their point. He says, instead, asking them a question. Do you truly believe that? Do you really think that all Christians think that way? There's ways in which we can begin to cultivate better questions that discern the intent of the other person. And then finally, whichever one you have left, I haven't been marking them for you. I figured you could figure out which branch you wanted to put them on. The last one is this. We have to learn how to ask questions that take people one step slowly at a time. We have to learn how to ask questions that take people one step slowly at a time. And he goes on from there and he describes the way in which he says it's counterintuitive to the way most Christians think. But we should consider partial victories great successes. And he talked about the way in which we have to kind of redo our mindset of, like I talked about this morning, we're not going to have all those airplane conversations where in a matter of an hour and a half to 2 hours, we have successfully defended the whole gospel, we have brought them to their knees of repentance, and they are now full believers in Jesus Christ from the time we leave Des Moines to the time we arrive in Denver. He says that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is to help people take just that next step by a question that we ask towards a deeper relationship or an understanding or experience of grace. So if we get the big win, great. But he says that's not in the long-term relationships. That's not the goal. It's those small incremental victories of pointing people and having people step one step closer to Jesus. He reframes it a little bit. If you remember the picture that I showed you it would be close to 18 months ago. And it was that picture of the cross in the middle, and then there were all the stick figures that were around it. And we talked about the way in which we just need to get people moving towards Jesus. He takes a different illustration to that same point. And he talks about beginning to see with spiritual eyes people on an A to Z spectrum of a relationship with Jesus. A being an absolute atheist, an antagonistic atheist, and Z being someone who has just given their life to Jesus and is living into this new relationship with him. And he says everybody that you meet is going to be, if they don't know Jesus yet, is going to be somewhere on this spectrum. And he says, unfortunately, Christians always believe that the people they're talking to are way down like T, U, V, W, somewhere down, way on the other end of the, that's backwards for you, I'm sorry. You guys are way over an A over here. But it's always at the end of it, right? We think they're so much closer to receiving Jesus and expressing this deep commitment. And he says, in the culture in which we are, the growing reality is that more people are closer to the letter A. More people are much closer to atheist, antagonistic, than they are towards just around the corner from believing. And he says we have to begin to cultivate different sorts of questions for people when they're in different places of this spiritual journey. So the questions that you ask someone who's a T, U, V, or W is, hey, would you like to come to church with me? The question that you ask someone who is an EFG is, tell me, what sort of understanding of spirituality do you have? Those are two very different questions, trying to help each person take their next step in that journey towards Jesus. So if you think about it maybe that way, that gives you a lot of homework to do, right? If you start thinking about people who are antagonistically atheist to those who have just committed their life to Christ, and kind of the full spectrum of people in between, how would we begin to ask better questions to get people to take that next step towards Jesus? Again, that's the bonsai tree. It's based on questions. It's based on long-lasting relationships. And it at its heart begins to develop a testimony of walking with people, bringing them closer to Jesus. Any questions on that? I recognize that's a bit more ethereal. It's a bit more big picture. But again, I want to give you the framework, allow you to take it home and work it through at your own pace. Learning how to ask better questions, and through the questions inviting people into a growing relationship with Jesus. Yeah?
In this area, well, we'll say the whole area of Iowa, if I come in contact with people, how big a percent of the people would claim that they are Christian? In other words, they may not go to church. They, I guess I've never really sat down and talked with an atheist because I've never met one. Okay? There's one guy who I used to work with. He was a Taoist. Okay, and so we had a nice time talking, but he informed me how persecuted he felt living in Iowa by the Christians. How many people out there, whether truth or denial, are, claim to be Christian?
I honestly don't have a good answer to that. I would surmise this, though, that we think the percentage is a lot higher than what it really is. I would, does Ron know the answer to this? Do you have a demographic study?
No, I have more problems.
You have more problems?
I worked with a guy once, and we were out for coffee, and he said, I'm a Christian. And I said, how do you know you're a Christian? And that wasn't the right question, apparently, because we're still friends, but that discussion didn't go very far after that. And yeah, how do you find out? Just answer the question unless you start, like you say, asking questions.
And I think your question, Stan, begs a lot of other questions, right? To what extent, what do we hold to be Christians, right? Are we born again? Or are we like Ron's coworker, we're like claiming to be a Christian, but we don't really know the answer to why or how? I would just submit that I think the percentage of people that are actually born again Christians in the Pella area is a lot less than we think it is. And so we should be much more quick to begin those conversations and those relationships and those friendships that invite that conversation more deeply and broadly. I can go back and I can just, over my years in Sully, I remember very pointedly within the last 3 years of our time there, most people had begun to lose track of who their neighbors were. And if they knew them, they were coming up to find that they did not have faith backgrounds. And that was just in the small town of Sully, right? So there was about a 40% turnover of homes over our 10 years there. And a good portion of them were not connected to the faith at all. So I think that continues to be the conversation, the way that the communities turn. Any questions about the frameworks that I've presented? I'm going to give you one more, and then we're going to try to tackle this by 6 o'clock, answer a few more questions, and then I'm going to send you home to do your homework. And just know that my phone is on, my email's open, the door's always open. I would love to continue the conversation, but I hope that our time tonight has been kind of a primer or a prepper for you to get started on developing your personal testimony in a couple ways. I got one more for you, and it's the 2 arrows at the bottom of your paper. And this is going to come back for me to a gentleman that I've shared with you before. His name is Jamie Winship. And Jamie Winship talks about a particular way to develop a testimony or to develop a presentation of the gospel in what he calls identity exchange. And it's exchanging a false identity for a true identity. And so if you're filling that out, you can simply take this and just write false identity. And then the bottom one, you can write true identity. And Jamie Winship describes this process of how often in our lives we believe something that the devil tells us that is not true about who we are. If he quotes this idea that the devil is the great accuser. The devil's referred to that on the pages of Scripture. And so the devil accuses us and makes us believe something that is not true about us. Whether that's we're unsavable, we're unlovable, we're not smart enough, whatever it might be, the devil gets us to believe that through accusing or tricking, and so we start living in that reality. We start living out of this deep sense of fear, this deep sense of inner conflict, all sorts of things that we start believing about ourselves that keeps us from experiencing the love of Jesus Christ. And so Jamie Winship talks about this way in which people meet Jesus at that moment, and then he heals them from that false identity, and he gives them a true identity. He speaks to them in such a way that he reminds them of who they are and who they've been created to be and the identity that they have in Jesus Christ. Whether that's from an unloved child to a child of God, whether that's from one who should be ashamed to one who is fully seen or known, there's all kinds of ways in which false identities are exchanged for true identities in Jesus. And so one of the ways I believe that we can begin to cultivate a sense of our own testimony is what sort of lies did we believe about ourselves, and what sort of truth do we believe because of Jesus. That's a testimony we can speak of personally, but it's also a way in which we can invite others to come to know Jesus as well. What sort of lies do they believe about themselves? What sort of things are untrue? What sort of fears do they have within? What sort of inner conflict are they working with? And to begin to listen and ask questions, and then invite them to experience a true or a new identity in Jesus. Now this begs a question. We have to believe in the voice of the Good Shepherd, where Jesus will actually tell them this. right? We have to trust that the Spirit is moving in their heart and will reveal to them that there is something different that Jesus wants to show them and to teach them and to allow them to believe about themselves. And that's the whole identity's change, the exchange. That the voice of Jesus tells them something different about themselves. So again, it's just a framework. It's an opportunity for us to maybe look at our own story. What have we believed that's not true? How did Jesus change that, and what does he now call us? It's one way to look at it. And then invite those who you're walking with to experience the same. So I want to leave it there. I feel like I've given you the fire hose again tonight. There's frameworks, there's structures, there's not threads tonight. There's just pictures that I hope kind of draw to your attention what that particular framework of a testimony is about. And I truly do encourage you, take those home now, and over the week, kind of start putting some pen to paper, putting some framework on that. Write your own story into it. If it's on the night train, maybe write your own story into it if it's on the day train. Begin to cultivate some questions. Begin to cultivate how you would answer the questions. I once was this, but now I'm this. Or how has the gospel made a difference in my life? All kinds of ways that we can begin to, if we take the time and commit it to prayer, we can begin to develop our own testimonies along the way. Carol. Hold on. We got a Google answer, so this is good.
According to a religious landscape study of adults in Iowa by Pew Research Center, 77% of Iowa adults are Christian. That's broadly defined. That includes Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. Non-Christian faiths are 1%. Unaffiliated, atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular are 21%. And of those unaffiliated, only 4% say atheist, 2% say agnostic, and 16% say nothing in particular.
Thank you. I thank the Pew Research Fund for including Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses into the Christian faith, where some of them don't even believe in Jesus. So, interesting.
1% Mormon, 1% Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay. It's interesting, though. Over 70% of adults in Iowa would say they're Christian. Any other questions on the... What's that?
I think it goes back to what Ron's coworker said.
It absolutely comes back to what Ron's coworker says, right? How do you mark that out? How do you make sense of that? Yep, absolutely. All right. Again, I recognized I gave you a lot to think about, a lot to process. Again, my phone is always on. Just probably don't call after 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock because the answers you get won't be very good. But again, I just want to strongly encourage you. Dig in. Begin to develop some of that vocabulary from your own journey, from your own story. And then just one more question. And this is a question for next week. It is Easter next week. How many of you are available to come back and have another continued session, or will you be gone? This is not a guilt trip. This is not a... I just want to make sure that if we're all going to be gone, I'm just going to cancel this next week, and we're gonna wrap up on the 7th. Who, just by a show of hands, who's going to be gone or not available? Okay, probably. If we're good, why don't we skip next week, and then we will come back and we'll wrap everything up on the 7th of April, if that works. I love you all, but if there's only half of us here, it's probably going to miss the mark a little bit. So We'll skip next week, come back on April 7, and we'll wrap up our time together. So, thank you. I'm here for questions if you need them.